What's up everybody, Jack here from Half Chrome, and today I want to talk about how I built this. This is an FPV drone, a 5-inch FPV freestyle rig, and I did it kind of on a budget. My goal was to do it under $200, and I was pretty darn close. What I did was I kind of sourced a bunch of different parts, and I have a really detailed spreadsheet if you want to take a look with some different options. And I think the best you can do if you're to build your own is about $170. And if you guys have suggestions of other things you think I should include in that list, please email me. My email's on that spreadsheet, drones@halfchrome.com, and I'll update the list from time to time just so that you guys know where to go for inexpensive FPV parts to build one of your own quads. Now I'm going to walk you through step by step how I did this, but before we get started, I have to let you know, I don't think building a drone is for everyone. You have to have the right tools, you have to have some patience, and you have to have a bit of time. If you don't have the tools or the patience or the time, what I recommend is buying a ready-to-go FPV quad, and this is the Nazgul. There are a few really nice options, but this Nazgul here is probably my favorite. You can get this for about $260 to $280 depending on the configuration you get. That is for analog, and if you're going HD, HD is always going to be a little bit more expensive. I also did just build an HD Zero quad, and I've got a DJI quad that I built, so I'll talk about those as well. But those are definitely going to be over $200. But if you want to build something, you're in the right place. So I'm going to take you step by step what I did to put this together, how I set it up in Betaflight. I also ran into some hiccups along the way, so I had to troubleshoot that, and I'll show you what I did. I'd say all in all, I probably have about maybe close to 10 hours in this build, and not 10 hours building. A lot of it was tear down and put together because I did it wrong, or tear down and put together because I messed something up. And I messed something up. So stay tuned. Hopefully you won't mess things up. And if you're looking to build a quad, I'll walk you through it. Stay tuned. All right, let me start by walking you through the steps that I took. The first thing you need to do is make sure you have a place to build this. You need a dedicated desk or shelf or table or something that you can solder on, and you need the right tools. So let me talk about the tools that I used. So you're gonna need some hex drivers. I used a 1.5 millimeter, a 2 millimeter, and a 2.5 millimeter hex driver. I also used a 5/16 nut driver. Also an 8 millimeter will work. That is for the prop nut to get on top of the motor, tighten those propellers down. You'll need a needle nose pliers and a side cutters to cut the wires. I used pliers from time to time to tighten down the standoffs. I also found a magnet super helpful in picking up little pieces of things that I dropped. One of the worst things about building is dropping one of these tiny little screws. You got to search around for it. That was a pain. I probably lost, I don't know, 20 minutes searching for screws throughout this process. So make sure you have a clean and well set up area so they're not dropping things and looking for them. Put things where you need them to be. I also found later on that one of those little magnetic cups works wonders. I think they call them mechanics tool savers. I don't know. I'll put a link in the description down in that spreadsheet, but I found that super helpful. Also electrical tape or 3M double-sided sticky tape. And of course you'll need a ton of zip ties, small and medium sized. I also put things on this little blue work mat, which had little compartments, and even some of them were magnetized, super helpful. Now you will of course need a soldering iron as well. I have a fancy one, but you can pick one up for about 10 bucks if you don't have one. You're gonna need some solder, and I find leaded solder with some lead in it to be a little bit easier to work with. Make sure you get kind of the thin strand, but keep in mind, working with lead is poisonous, so you'll need a fan, and I always wear a mask when I'm soldering, otherwise I'll end up with a headache. So it kind of helps with that and also prevents my drones from getting COVID. I found a flex pen to be really helpful in tinning things or pre-soldering, and you'll probably need like an aim of flame to melt some shrink wrap on the receiver. Helping hands is helpful, so you know, if you need something to kind of hold things together while you're soldering, because you have two and you need at least three. Once you have your space set up and you're ready to go, the first thing you're gonna need to do is assemble your frame. Basically lay it out in front of you and then get to work. Okay, so once you get everything out, the first thing is to kind of lay it all out. So I know these pieces kind of hold the legs in the bottom. So I'm gonna kind of set them up how they are with kind of these arrows pointing in. Then I'm gonna kind of just lay the legs where they go, or the arms, legs. It doesn't walk. But either way. All right, then we kind of set them roughly in place where they need to go. And then I can kind of match this up, something like that. These will go closer. And then go ahead and start putting in screws. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put the screws in, moving from the bottom up. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and put the screws in from the top down. So these are my holes here, the longer screws. I believe it's these 3. Then so we'll get a couple of them in place, and then I can kind of put these nuts on to kind of hold it, and then I can get the rest of them on. We're going to move to the other side. Okay, next step is to go ahead and line up the other arms. Okay, so now I have, this is a Mamba stack. There are lots of different stacks. You're just going to kind of make sure that the mounting patterns will fit, right? So this one is, it's a 30.5 by 30.5, and it fits right in there perfectly. Now you can get different flight controllers, that's okay. But the thing you need to note is which direction they go. And somewhere on the flight controller, there's an arrow, and that direction is the front. So I know this is the front of my quad. I'm going to point that forward. Now, could you mount it differently? Yes, you can. I could mount it like this if I wanted, but then I just have to adjust things in Betaflight. I want it on the side here like this because then I have easy access to my USB port. So that's the thing you need to figure out is what's the best way to mount it for your USB port, and can you just mount it pointing forward? But before I mount this in my stack, I'm going to go ahead and solder on my battery lead, right? So here and here. I also need to mount my motors and solder my motor. So when I do that, I'm going to do it all at the same time. Now the motors I have are Racer Star brushless motors. These motors are really pretty darn inexpensive, and they do a decent job. I've got a buddy down the street. These are the motors that he runs on his quad, and it's a good place to start. So what I want to do is figure out how much motor wire do I need. So I'm going to kind of set it in place and figure out, am I going to trim any wires? Now, this top piece here is my flight controller. I'm actually going to separate them. Okay, so the motors I'm actually going to cut to length so that I just have a little bit more than I need. I'll probably cut a half an inch off or so. I don't have to if I don't want to, but it just kind of makes it a little bit cleaner. Now the motors motors will all be soldered to my ESC here on the bottom, and it's going to be easier to do that if I take my flight controller off. So I'm going to do that. All right, so I'm going to solder on connector. I'm going to solder on motors. That's the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and separate these, my ESC from my flight controller. Actually, just remove the little gummies from the bottom. Set them off to the side. You know, I have this little dish. It's magnetic, so it holds screws really well, but it's a good place to put stuff while I'm working. Right, so it'll be easier to solder onto my ESCs if this obviously isn't there. And I've got my different motor wires here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and also I'm gonna have to do some soldering here on my flight controller. Everything is nicely laid out, and it kind of tells me, you know, 5-volt ground, LED, all sorts of fun stuff. But I also have this diagram that's important to note because that's going to help me understand where I connect my camera, my receiver, my video transmitter, all that fun stuff needs to be connected. So now soldering. Soldering's tricky, but I'll give you a few tips. So mount your motors to the frame first. These are actually 2.5mm screws, which is why I was having so much difficulty putting them in, because I was using a 2mm driver. Now here's an important tip. Don't tighten these screws down until you have all 4 in place. Really kind of leave them loose, and then once they're all in there, then go ahead and tighten them down. Just going to make it easier to kind of align things up, and I kind of make them snug, and then I'll go around and make sure they're tight. So first snug, then tighten. Okay, so I am going to start soldering. A couple of tips before you get started. Bolt your ESC down. I already got my motors in, you can see. Now I'm going to flux pen all of these pads that I'm going to solder. That's just going to help the solders flow nice and smoothly. Flux. Now this is easy to grab and super helpful. I'm also going to make sure my soldering tip is nice and clean and shiny. You can see that it's not. I've got some flux here, dip it in there, and get it all nice and shiny. Now, one more thing, actually 2 more things. One, get a good solder. I use a lead, a solder with some lead in it. It just flows better. It is poisonous. So grab a fan and turn the fan on so you're not breathing in the fumes. If I don't do that, I'll get a headache. So turn my fan on and get soldering. So the first thing I do is I'm going to pre-tin the ESC. So I'm basically going to put a little bit of solder on each of the pads, and that's just going to make things easier. So I hit it with the pen, and then I place the soldering iron on the pad, and then I kind of let that heat up, and then I flow the solder onto each one of those pads, and that just makes my life easier. And then I'll move on to the capacitor and the battery lead. Now we're going to go ahead and solder the motor wires to the motor pads. Just make sure that motor 1 is going to pad 1, and it doesn't matter which order the 3 wires are soldered to the pads. We'll adjust all that. Okay, so I've got everything bolted in. I got my flight controller on. I actually probably should have just set my ESC on there initially. I taped down the wires so they're where I want them to be, so it's kind of a nice clean look. And then I'm going to go ahead and follow the directions that you see here for wiring everything up. I'm going to attach my camera up here, my receiver down here. Nothing's going down here. I'm not setting up a GPS module. And then my VTX will solder onto here. Remember, RX goes to TX. RX is receive, TX is transmit. So transmit from one to receive on the other. Now my receiver here, I had to solder these wires on, and you can just kind of see ground is black, power is red, and then RX and TX, it just kind of matters, you know, that you know where they are. Color wire is actually totally irrelevant, but just something to kind of keep in mind. Now I'm going to go ahead and shrink wrap this on, and that'll help keep the wires in place, as well as this UFL connection with this antenna. I definitely recommend pre-tinning your wires and your pads. I was initially just pre-tinning the pads, and when I started pre-tinning the wires and the pads, it just makes soldering that much easier. So that just means getting them well with a little bit of this flux pen and then adding solder to the tips here and to the pads there. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and attach my camera. Initially, I was going to add this Ant cam from RunCam, which is actually a really nice camera. It is a nano camera, so you need to add this little micro adapter so that it fits in most frames. But I had this RunCam, I think it's a Phoenix, yeah, Phoenix laying around. So I'm going to use this. I think it's a slightly nicer camera, but actually the Ant is, I think, 1200 TVL, so that's pretty solid. Now, I can't just plug this in. I'm going to have to go ahead and cut these wires and solder them on. Now you'll see that, you know, whether you go with the Ant, you know, or some other camera, sometimes they have extra wires, and that's actually for a camera remote, right? So this actually came with the Ant, so you can kind of adjust settings on the camera itself by either, you know, plugging in directly here, or using this plug right on the side to one of these controllers. So just so you know that. All right, so I'm gonna cut these wires, solder it on. This actually has an extra wire. I don't know what that is. It's actually not even listed. So I have power, ground, video. Those are the ones that I need to connect. All right, so I got those soldered on. Okay, so now some video transmitters, you can see I've got 2 powers and 2 grounds. This is power in, this is power out. So what I could have done is I could have just powered my camera right off of my VTX. I'm not going to do that, so I'm actually not going to use this power out, but I am going to ground both of these. So I'm going to ground them together. So let's twist them. And depending on the video transmitter you have, you may not have to deal with separate, power out. So I'm just going to pull this one out of the way because I'm not going to use it. I'm actually going to clip it so I don't have random exposed wire there. And I'm going to pre-tin and solder. Okay, so now I'm going to mount the VTX and the receiver with some double-sided sticky tape. There we go. I'll likely zip tie both of these down also, but for now, make sure everything works before I do that. Now, another super important thing to note is always make sure that your video transmitter has an antenna attached to it. Now, this isn't necessarily the antenna I'm going to use for the full build, but I just grabbed this and plugged it in because you never power this on without an antenna. That could ruin it. Okay, so now the next step is to build the frame, but before you do that, I'm gonna go ahead and check to make sure that everything works in case I gotta take things apart. I don't want to have that frame all the way complete. And one thing you're gonna want is, this is a smoke stopper, basically something that will trip, blow a fuse, turn on a light, let you know if there are any faulty wires. So this is a smoke stopper and super important. Now I'm gonna plug this in and hope for good tone. All right, all motors are beeping, that's good. I've got a light on my VTX, I get a light on my flight controller, I get a light on my receiver, we're good to go. I'm using the small screws with these metal standoffs. All right, I'm actually not going to use this piece. I guess you could, it just kind of protects the camera, but I feel like it's going to fix the angle or make it difficult for me to change the angle. So I'm just going to use these 2 tiny screws. I'm going to put them in the middle hole of these little holders here. This is always a little bit tricky, or at least I think so. Okay, so I ran into an issue mounting this camera. It turns out that the gap here is 23 millimeters, but the camera is a standard 19 millimeter camera. So, I need a bracket for that, which didn't come with. So basically what I did is I cut, I think 6 layers of tape here, and I drilled a hole through the center. And that'll serve as my temporary bracket, but that should work, do the trick. And then I'll screw it in with a longer screw. So go ahead and set that up there. All right, so I'm putting in the last few metal standoffs. Now these in the middle, they're actually only going to be attached on the top. And, I could have left them out, but I feel like they'll just add a little bit more protection for my flight controller. They're not just looking pretty, and you can see how they're kind of angled out there. So not the best, but it'll still work. Okay, so just a couple of things left to do. Obviously check your screws, make sure they're all tight. I'm going to zip tie these things down. I'm going to zip tie the battery lead up here just to kind of create some safety in case I crash. I won't pull the battery lead out, and I'm going to zip tie my antennas up. I added this Fox Ear Lollipop antenna to my VTX because it's really nice. It's better than basically the stock stuff that comes with it, but the stock stuff will be fine. I just happen to have it laying around because I have got lots of stuff laying around. So I'm going to add a zip tie here to the VTX and receiver. Now because I have it, I'm going to add a little battery, little rubber here. Kind of helps keep the battery in place. You know, this stuff is super cheap. You could actually use double-sided sticky tape, anything rubber. Just kind of creates a little bit more friction and will help keep the battery from sliding in a crash. Not necessary, but I've got it, so I'm going to use it. This is built for another drone, but it'll certainly do the trick. There we go. Also need a battery strap, but I got plenty of those things laying around. You could use rubber bands, zip ties, however you want to do it. Usually, whoever you buy your quad from will, you know, sometimes they send them to you for free. Sometimes they're included in the package, but they're not expensive. Okay, so I got it all built. A couple of things. I did end up finding the brackets for my camera, so I didn't have to use the double-sided sticky tape, but it actually worked fairly well. You know, it was a tight fit to get it in here. I really had to kind of squeeze the carbon fiber to get this top plate on. But it's there and it works. I would say overall it took me, I don't know, 4.5 hours to build this thing. I started right after breakfast and I finished right before lunch. But it's not ready yet. I have to go ahead and set this up in Betaflight, and hopefully that won't take me forever. But again, it's a process. I'm going to walk you through it. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and flash Betaflight 4.3 on here. You don't have to do this step. You just don't. You can skip ahead if you want to just run whatever firmware is on here. But since I haven't actually flown this and I haven't changed anything, I'm going to, because why not? 4.3 is just a little bit better than what's on here, and this one has 4.2.11. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and update to Betaflight 4.3. Here's how you do it. I'm going to click on Update Firmware. Auto detect. To make sure that you have the right target, right? This mine is Fury F4 OSD. Yours may be different. Click auto detect, it should tell you. Now I want it to be 4.3.0 right there. I'm gonna click load firmware online. Now, hopefully I can just click this flash firmware button. Contacting my bootloader didn't work. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to disconnect. Right, I'm going to load the firmware online. I'm going to find my bootloader button, which is just a button here on the side of the flight controller. Hold that button down, plug back in. Boom, I'm in DFU mode. This should work. And now I'm going to click flash firmware. Fingers crossed. Looks like we're in business. Flashing. Yes. Programming successful. Connect. All right, super important. Click apply custom defaults. Always do that. Accelerometer is able but not calibrated. All right, so step one. Calibrate the accelerometer. Make sure your drone is flat and level. Click the button. All right. Now that it is calibrated, we want to check to make sure that it behaves properly. Left, left, right, back. Right. If you do this and it's not behaving the way you see it on screen, then chances are you mounted your flight controller incorrectly. You can either adjust, you know, probably you need to twist it, you know, maybe, you know, 90 or 180 degrees, or you can change it in Betaflight. Okay, so now I need to do a little bit of work here. I believe my UART1 is my serial RX, and I believe my VTX is actually smart audio. I just know that because that's what it was. We can double check here on the layout that I used, right? But I remember I connected my receiver to TX1, right? So that's why serial RX, that's my receiver here, is on UART1. And my video transmitter, I definitely put that on UART3. And mine is smart audio, not IRX tramp. So that's just the protocol that this one uses. Yours may be different. It depends on the VTX that you use. I'm going to click save and reboot. That's probably the only thing that this flight controller already had set up. But let's just kind of walk through, see what we got going here. 8K seems right. Now this is where you can kind of change the board if things aren't set the way you want. D-shot beacon, I like to turn those on. That enables me to make this drone beep if it's crashed. Air mode, we're going to leave it on. I don't have GPS. Craft name, all right, let's call this bad boy half chrome. Right, that's what I'll see in the goggles when I'm flying. Save and reboot. All right, PIDs, these are defaults here. Receiver, I'm going to have to do some work. Modes, all right, add range. Let's arm on aux1. Add range. I like to put angle mode on aux2, and I put angle mode as a default up at the top. I'll show you how this works when we have our controller. Beeper, I put that on aux3, and flip over after crash. I like to put that on aux4. Save. Okay, so now I'm on the presets tab, and I need to set up my VTX tables. So what I'm going to do is go to VTX, and I'm going to search for my VTX, which is the AKK. Let's see if they got AKK. No, or it's the race VTX. It's not going to be in here. Can't spell today. All right, it's not there, so what I'm going to have to do is go online and find it, which I did. I Google searched the VTX race, whatever, and here it is. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to my CLI tab. I'm going to paste it in here. Hit enter. Click save, and now if I go to my VTX or my video transmitter tab, I see my VTX table. So a couple of things on here. Let's go band. I like to be on race band, either 8 or 1. Let's go 8 power. Let's go 200. And low power disarm, we'll say on. So low power disarm, you probably want to turn that on. That just puts the lowest power on the VTX if you're not flying. And when you fly, it'll switch to higher power output. Now this one only does 200 milliwatts. Some of them go all the way up to 1 watt or 1,000 milliwatts. It's better, right? But this was a $10 VTX budget build. Here we go. So I'm going to go ahead and click save. Okay, so now what we need to do is flash the receiver. And this Express ELRS receiver, a lot of times you have to flash these the first time at least via Wi-Fi. So you plug it in and it'll flash slowly, and you wait until it starts flashing fast. That means it's enabled Wi-Fi mode. So you're going to go to your Express ELRS configurator, download it if you haven't already, and you're going to find the newest release candidate. Find your receiver. Mine is the Radio Master, but it's also the same as the Happy Model 2.4, and it's the EP 2.0. Or I'm sorry, EP1 2400RX. I'm going to go down, set your binding phrase to whatever you want. That's like your Wi-Fi password, and it'll automatically connect to your radio if you've set it up there. Then you're going to click Build, domain, US, you're going to click Build. So you go ahead and build that up and it'll store on your computer. Then what you're going to do is you're going to connect to the Wi-Fi on your computer. Right. Once it's flashing quickly, you should see Express ELRS. Password is Express ELRS. Connect to it. And you're going to go to 10.1, 10.0.0.1. All right, and it should look something like this, Express ELRS update page. Now, you've already built that file. You're going to go ahead and drop that file here from wherever it was. Shoot, where'd it go? Let's go to my recents. Go ahead and build. I'm going to let it build again. Okay, then it opens up this file, looks something like this, and I'm going to go ahead and drag that now right to the file. We can choose, we click update, and it's going to go through that update process. Now, I just did this, and it worked for me, so I'm good to go. Now, what I need to do is to go into Betaflight, and because I already set up my radio with that pass key, and they're the same, it connects automatically. Now, when I initially clicked on, I didn't see it because my receiver provider wasn't Crossfire. So make sure that it's on Crossfire, power on your radio. We're going to check to make sure it all works.
Welcome to HTX. Switch warning. Disarmed. Flight mode angle.
Give it a second. And we can see that we're connected, right? Everything works the way that it should. Sometimes, if you're pushing on the sticks and it's not operating correctly, then what you're going to want to check is your channel channel map. Mine is AETR1234, right? Sometimes by default they're set up as TAER. You just need to adjust that. Right? Click Save, and you'll be good to go. Now, one more thing I need to check before we can fly, and that is the motors. Now, this is super important. Whenever you plug in, notice I don't have any props on here, but I need to check that I have the right motors, that the motor that spins is the correct motor, and it's spinning in the correct direction. So I'm going with the standard motor direction. Now I need a battery for this step. Let's adjust the camera so you can see what I'm doing here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and plug in. Motors will not spin if you don't have a battery. Now, I like to use a piece of paper because it kind of helps me understand what's going on. So what I'm going to do here is test the motors. Before you can do that, you have to make sure the props are off. Do not do this with props on. All right, so I'm going to spin motor 1. Is it the correct motor? It should be this one. It is. And is it spinning the correct direction? So as I let it spin, I'm going to put this piece of paper down here and show me which direction it's moving. You can see that it's moving in the direction of the arrow here, so we're good. So we're going clockwise. Okay. Motor 2 should be up here, and it should be going counterclockwise. Motor 2 is going clockwise, so that's not right. I'll have to check that. So motor 2, I need to change. Motor 3 is down here. And it's also backwards, so I need to fix motor 3. And motor 4 is moving the right direction, so we're good. So I need to reverse motors 2 and 3. All right. Okay, so to swap motor direction, click on motor direction Then you're going to click on individually. And then you're just going to select the motors that you need to change the direction of. So here in my case, I need to change motor 2. I click on reverse. Motor 3, click on reverse, click on OK. And then we'll see if it did the trick. Motor 2 is working right now. Motor 3 is. All right, make sure 1 and 4 are still doing what they're supposed to be doing. Yep. And 4. Okay, everything is working. Let's go fly it. Now, I haven't messed around with any of the PIDs. We're just going to see how this flies right out of the box. Betaflight defaults should be pretty good. I'm excited. Let's go. So this is the part where I show you I took it outside and I was just able to just start ripping and flying, and everything was great and fantastic, right? Everything just works because you put it together the way you were supposed to. But the reality is, no. My first flight was actually a little bit different. I got the drone up in the air and I was just, flying really easy, and boom, fell out of the sky. So, I did some testing. What looked like I was getting motor desyncs. I could hover it, I could fly it a little bit as long as I was gentle on the throttle, but it kept falling out of the sky. Okay, so now what do you do? It's very possible that your drone won't fly. And if it just won't, first thing, check the motors and the props. That's step number 1. Make sure they're going the right direction. The props are in the right spot. After you've done that, then there's a bajillion different things that could be wrong. I was having motor desyncs. I did a bunch of different things. I flashed the Blue Jay firmware. I did some preset filtering. All that stuff helped a little bit, but at the end of the day, I had to replace the ESC. Turns out I had damaged it, and that was my fault, right? I'd actually initially soldered the motors on upside down, the ESC, and I'm like, oh, well, you could fix that, right? But I just kind of flipped it and resoldered, and I think in the process I damaged something. So swapping the ESC did fix it. Now it still needs to be tuned, and that's a whole nother video, right? The tuning, the Blue Jay ESC software. I thought about adding that here, but that's a lot, right? I've already talked a whole lot about how to put this together, and if you're lucky, you won't have the same problems that I did. But you do have to consider you're putting in a lot of time and effort into this, and you may have to put in a little bit more. I absolutely spent more time troubleshooting than I did building, and I put in some hours building. That's when something like this Nazgul that is pre-built, pre-tuned, ready to go out of the box, everything is super clean and nice, at $260, $275, $280 really, with a receiver, is just really ready to go. All you have to do is set it up. Now, I haven't even talked about setting up your radio, and that's another process, again, another video. So before you dive into building, you have to think, is this for you? Are you willing to commit to the time that you may have to do after the build to figure it out? I even built an HD Zero Quad. I got everything working, and then I tried to change something, and I ended up blowing the whole deal. So I got hours into that one already. It did fly. I tried to fix something. Now I got some hours to get it flying again. So just kind of keep that in mind before you build. It's just a process. Now, the internet is great. YouTube is fantastic in terms of helping you troubleshoot. but you just have to be able to have that time to do so. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful, and if you still want to build, please take a look at the FPV build list that I have linked in the description down below. I'll show you which parts I used. I'll show you which parts I would recommend. Now, these are not high-end, top-of-the-line parts. These are kind of low-end to middle of the road, things that will work well, but these are just my suggestions. And if you have a suggestion, something you think would be better for this list, let me know, send me a link, and I'll throw it in there for you. Now, at the end of the day, I did get this thing flying, and it works just well enough. I think my Nazgul that was pre-built flies better because some professional drone builder and tuner put it together, not some Joe Schmo like me. With time, it'll get better and easier, and your quads will fly smoother. So it's all a process and a learning process, and it can be kind of fun. Also, something to note, when you fly these things, you'll crash these things, and you'll have to repair these things. So going through the build process is helpful because you understand how these components go together, and you'll be better suited to fix them in the future. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful. If it was, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and check out our website, halfchrome.com. Hey, good luck everyone, and happy flying.